Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer's Corner. Today, I've invited Adam Berezin, co founder and CEO of MSDynamicsWorld.com, to share his thoughts on MSDW's annual Solution Research Study. For those not familiar, this is a study focused on finding out how Dynamics users who frequently visit MSDW are consuming online content or information sources and comparing their responses to how ISV marketers like yourselves think they are. Also, we benchmark this study year to year and make note of any major shifts in user consumption or marketer spending patterns. So, hello, Adam, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Adam, I mentioned the research study to everyone, and
hmm
as you know, we've had several key findings from this year's study. So, I'd like to ask you to comment on a couple that most relate to your role in publishing and managing an online website.
Sure.
So, starting out, um, one of the key findings had to do with the question that we ask about how often the Dynamics users visit vendor websites versus online third party sites like yours. And what we saw is that most responded that they visit vendor sites about once a month. However, the majority said they visit sites like yours once a week.
Hmm.
So, from my point of view, looking at having run this survey for 4 years now, it seems pretty consistent that Dynamics users continue to visit third party editorial websites like MSDW more frequently than marketers realize they do. And I would assume that this has something to do with their interest in timely editorial, but of course, we'd like to hear your point of view on that.
Sure. So I think my opinion is that when you have a centralized resource like MS Dynamics World that is focused on a very niche marketplace, the Dynamics ERP and CRM channel, people rely on the content to essentially find strategies for optimizing their existing Dynamics platform, or enhancing the current capabilities of their existing platform.
Hmm.
And I think as far as why people would come to a third-party editorial site like ours in the Dynamics channel is because not only for the reasons that I just gave, but from an actual professionalism standpoint, they want content that is created by a professional team or a team of professional editors and writers. And we're really the only major third party online resource, news and information resource in the dynamic space. But there are lots of other forums, but those are more technical. And, our content is more focused around strategy. So I think people, you're dealing with complex systems. So, people want to know the business benefits that they can consistently receive from their investment,
Hmm.
in that business system. So that's why, they come to MS Dynamics World regularly because we provide that type of content.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense, and especially with the news angle, for them to stay on top of things as they're constantly shifting, as we know they do,
That's true. Yeah.
they need to visit more frequently.
Yeah,
Um,
I also want to add one more thing too. Part of the appeal of a site like MS Dynamics World is that we are not a marketing arm of Microsoft. We're an independent entity, and therefore the views that we provide, come from that view of being independent, and we're not really beholden to anyone. So we tell it how it is, basically.
right.
And I think people respect that, and I think they know that when they come to our site, they're going to find out the real deal about certain Microsoft products that they use or think about using, or all different types of unbiased viewpoints, which I think is very attractive. And that also gives the site a lot of credibility, and the site's been around we're in our 11th year right now. So, we've built up a tremendous amount of trust among our readers, in part because of that methodology we practice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, speaking about building up trust with readers and your audience, for those that don't have the demographic profile, could you quickly tell everyone who those users are and what industries they represent?
Sure. So, MSDW, so we have a little over 70,000 active users to the site. Now, the interesting thing about our site is that we primarily attract business users, those senior level executives,
Hmm.
people with purchasing power, people that are responsible for, you know, uh, making a decision about their particular Dynamics platform and the ISV solutions that go along with it, or a heavy influencer in those decisions and that decision making process. So and that's really who we write for. We write for those business executives. We don't really write for those, developers or people that do a lot of coding, because we provide that, sort of higher level strategic view. It naturally attracts those business users.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that when we asked the demographic questions up front in the survey, there was a large population of
Mm,
influencers who commented anecdotally that it was basically their job to do the research and make recommendations on solutions to entire teams in their
mm-hmm,
companies.
mm-hmm,
So that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
So, obviously, assuming because we have ISV marketers on the line, they might be curious about the best ways for them to align their solution set and sponsorship of it with MSDW. Do you have any quick suggestions for them?
So I assume you're referring to lead, how they can go about generating leads and reaching our audience in that way.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, well, there's a lot of different options that we have for generating leads through MSDynamicsWorld. I don't really have time to get into all those details on this call. But I can. I guess I'll leave you with this. We do have a lot of lead capture programs that we offer where people can capitalize, or ISVs can capitalize on, the information of people that have consumed their content, which I think is very important because that will give them a strong indication as to which stage of the buying cycle they're in, and from a lead qualifying and lead follow-up perspective, that can be very helpful for their sales and marketing team.
Well, yeah, of course. And actually, that's a great segue for me to ask you a couple questions about another key finding. So it's taken at least 2 years, but finally, we have alignment between what the Dynamics users say they want to consume in terms of content,
Mm.
and what the marketers are putting out there. So,
Hmm.
one of the key findings is that both parties are basically voting number one for webinars and product trials. And what's interesting about this to me is webinars consistently have been noted as being important by both sides. However, product trials traditionally, going back like even 4 years ago, those were noted as being important to our users in end stage. And what has evolved and changed over the last 3 years is now the users are saying they want to look at product trials in early, mid, and late stage. And the marketers have caught up in the sense that now they're ranking product trials right up there as well in all
Mm.
three stages.
Hmm.
So um, this is a big change, and it's something worth commenting about. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I think that's why this type of research is so important because it really can align perceptions, um,
Yeah.
and what certain marketers believe to be true in terms of what their prospects prefer to consume as far as content is concerned. Um, can in fact be the total opposite once you start conducting research among those prospects and really figure out, what they prefer to consume during the different stages of the buying cycle. So I think, you know, once again, that's why I find this data so interesting, because, um, you know, it really will help ISVs, you know, reach their prospects more effectively if they really know exactly what their prospects want in terms of content
Right.
throughout each of the different stages of the buy cycle. So that's really what that's what they can take away from this data.
Yes, exactly, Adam. And conversely, what we found out was that related to the data and the findings, there is still a gap or a discrepancy, because when we asked about how ISVs can capture the interests of the Dynamics users very early stage, the users voted pretty high for videos and podcasts. Now, podcasts we added just this year, and I'll explain that in a bit. But on the video side, that's something we've been looking at for the last couple of years. And the discrepancy is that whereas the users basically showed demand for those two content pieces, it
Hmm.
doesn't seem that the marketers are emphasizing or investing in them quite as much. Now, I happen to know that you've been offering video sponsorships,
Hmm.
recognizing the value of videos, and you're considering podcasts. Could you address those two contents?
Sure. So I think to answer, kind of the first question in terms of why haven't some marketers caught on, you really just hit a good point, and I think that what that says is that marketers really need to continuously educate themselves on the different types of content that's really available to them to promote to their prospects, and they need to do a better job of figuring out which type of content their prospects crave more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And and this type of research helps them, but they need to do that on a regular basis. Whether it's surveying their own prospects, or whatever. But that clearly is an indicator that there's sort of an educational gap in terms of what type of content marketers really should be focusing on creating. And then to answer your question about the podcasts and video, I think it also comes down, there's also an element of, I think lots of people not really knowing, lots of marketers not really knowing, how to, well, I'm sure they know how to make a video, and I'm sure they know how to make a podcast, but, um, not really knowing how to utilize those two things for lead generation purposes and branding purposes and marketing purposes. I think from a webcast standpoint, which 9 out of 10 companies know how to do webcasts and are
Mm-hmm.
familiar with webcasts because it's been around for so long. They're used to having visual aids, and they're used to making them interactive in terms of let's say doing a product demo or something like that. Podcasts are a little different because it's just audio. So I think the strategies that marketers need to employ for creating and using podcasts to their benefit from a marketing perspective, they have to be different, and it requires more of a thought leadership perspective,
Right.
as opposed, because you're not going to have that visual aid to kind of guide you through or guide your audience through the presentation. So I think it's a question of, do they think podcasts are popular? Yes, I do, but I don't think they've sort of wrapped their heads around how exactly to use them for marketing purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, video. There are lots of companies out there that in our space that have videos, and we've seen them. We have a video platform that we built, which is being heavily utilized. But there's still lots of companies out there that don't have any video content created. So this research study should be a wake up call to those companies. to let them know that they need to have video content as part of their arsenal for marketing and lead generation because their prospects demand it. And it's really just like, if you think of it, if you put it in simple terms, go where your prospects go. That will never fail you because
Right.
you'll always be in front of your prospects. So if your prospects want to hear podcasts, you should create podcasts. If they want to watch recorded videos, you should publish videos. If they want to hear hear and see live webcasts, you should do live webcasts. They provide you with that marketing roadmap. You just have to listen to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's my understanding too that you've been offering a podcast series on the editorial side and had great success with those. Any
Oh yeah.
comments on that?
Yeah, so Jason Gumpert, the other co-founder of MS Dynamics World, he runs the MSDW podcast, and it's been wildly successful. Those are geared towards business executives. They're much higher level, and we've been running those for about, I want to say, a year and a half, a little over a year and a
Oh,
half.
that long. Yeah.
Yeah, and the response to those has been great. Which once again is another indicator to ISVs that podcasts do work. It's funny. I think when a lot of software marketers hear podcast, they typically think it's something you download on iTunes, and
Hmm.
it's something that like Tony Robbins does or somebody like that. They're for motivation. They're stories and that have nothing to do with the business world. Not true. Um, you know our space is filled with interesting stories, and you just have to know how to structure the podcast to tell an interesting marketing story, whether it's about your company or interviewing somebody in your company that has an immense amount of knowledge of the particular industry that you focus on, or business need, whether it's business intelligence or reporting. It's all about telling an interesting story.
Oh, I totally agree. And frankly, with our audience today, this is exactly why we launched this podcast series on, in terms of MSDW's own marketing efforts, because we saw value in their potential, and we'll just wait and see how it works out, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Adam,
Mm-hmm.
thank you very much. As you know, these are just two of the several key findings. We are in the midst of rolling up the study to make it available to MSDW clients, and possibly in the future, we'll be doing a more comprehensive webcast as well. But I thought this would be a great preview for everybody to basically get a handle on what the research had to say this year. So thanks again for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.